there, and welcome to Murder Most British. I'm Zach, the colonial of the duo.
I'm Rachel, the resident redcoat, here to unravel the twisted tales of Britain's criminal past.
In this episode, we're off to the Cotswolds, that picture-perfect slice of English countryside, stone cottages, sleepy lanes, the whole postcard.
But in the spring of 1984, actually the year I was born, so this is quite interesting, something horrifying happened on a remote farm in Horton. It's a small village in Gloucestershire, southwest England. There was no pub, no high street, just 350 people and one hell of a mystery.
Yeah, they say 350, but they couldn't even get that. They're like, there's 200 or 400 or 350.
Give or take, yeah. A very small village.
The setting is Widden Hill Farm, a sheep farm just outside the village. And the couple at the center of this story, Graham and Margaret Backhouse. They lived there for about 5 years by 1984, after Graham inherited the farm from his father.
Before that, Graham had worked as a hairdresser. It's not clear how he was with scissors, but let's just say he was less than successful at sheep farming. By the time this story begins, he was in a serious financial trouble. About £70,000 in debt. The farm wasn't turning a profit and he was clearly feeling the pressure.
Especially
that's a lot
back
of
then.
money.
Back then, that's
Yeah,
a
early
big chunk.
80s.
But in public, the Backhouses looked like any other successful rural family. Graham was 43, Margaret, or Maggie as people called her, was 37. They had 2 young children, Harry, age 8, and Sophie, age 6. By all accounts, Maggie was well liked in the village, quiet, reliable, and devoted to her family.
But there were whispers about Graham. People said he was arrogant, sometimes abrupt. He claimed to have had a number of affairs, even boasted about them later, including affairs with friends' wives and a young agricultural student from a neighbouring farm. Whether those affairs actually happened or whether part of some larger delusion is something we'll come back to later.
Still, things in Horton took a darker turn in early 1984. Graham began telling police that he was the target of a campaign of threats. According to him, someone was out to get him. He said he'd been receiving anonymous phone calls, and they were disturbing. Then came the letters, crudely painted in block capitals, and then something even more grotesque happened.
Yeah, well, one morning, a farm worker found a sheep's head impaled on a post near the Backhouse's home. Attached to it was a note that simply read, "You next." As you can imagine, that rattled the family. I think it would rattle me. Very, very much so. Margaret was terrified. Graham said that he feared for all their lives. He claimed the vendetta might stem from one of the affairs or from a long-standing property dispute with a nearby neighbour named Colin Bedell Taylor.
Yeah, that'd be pretty scary.
Yeah.
Like, you're like, okay, someone's out to get us.
Very creepy.
You wouldn't leave, the shotgun, behind. You'd be carrying it around with you.
Very creepy.
A 63-year-old neighbor who had been somewhat reclusive after personal tragedies, including the loss of his 19-year-old son, Digby. In 1982, Digby died in a car crash, and the driver of the car, who survived, had later been given work on the Backhouse farm. That detail, for some, added a strange wrinkle to the tension between the two families.
But up until April, all of this was just ramblings, unsettling but no actual violence. That changed on the morning of April 9th, 1984.
It started out as ordinary as any Monday is, Mondays.
Moody Monday.
Maggie Backhouse, she left the farmhouse to take the kids to school or run some errands, stuff like that. Her own car had developed a fault, so Graham offered her his silver Volvo Estate, which we call a station wagon.
In America, yeah, you call it a station wagon or grocery getter, innit?
The grocery getter.
Yeah.
Well, it was a car built for rugged Scandinavian winters, complete with a heated metal plate beneath the driver's seat.
That feature, oddly enough, it could have been the thing to have saved her life, because when Margaret turned the key in the ignition, a bomb exploded beneath the seat. The force of the blast sent thousands of lead pellets into her lower body. tore through the car and lacerated her legs. By sheer luck, she survived. Very
Ooh,
lucky.
ouch. That is really nasty. But the metal plate beneath the seat deflected much of the explosion. Margaret managed to crawl from the wreckage, injured and bleeding. A passing school bus driver saw her and called for help. She was rushed to the hospital in Bristol, where doctors fought to save her.
Wow.
It's lucky that bus driver was going by. Out in the middle of nowhere countryside, like, that's crazy.
I mean, now obviously, if it was around the time in the morning where she was sort of heading out to take the kids to school, luckily, obviously, there was that school bus en route. Had there not have been, maybe, who knows? As the news of the bombing spread through the village of Horton, the village was stunned. This was the sort of thing that just happened in thrillers, not in a small town or village with no pub, one village hall. Police initially speculated that animal rights activists might be behind the attack. At the time, groups had been bombing labs and offices linked to animal testing. So the police, did have an idea that it could be them, but farms weren't usually on the list.
Well, the Army bomb squad came in. They examined the Volvo and found that the device had been homemade, crafted from like some scaffolding pipe and loaded with lead shot from shotgun shells. It had been positioned directly beneath the driver's seat. It was definitely designed to kill the driver.
And soon suspicion began circling close to home. Graham Backhouse told investigators he believed he was the real target, not his wife. He showed the police letters he'd received, the sheep's head warning, the anonymous calls, and he pointed fingers specifically at his neighbour, Colin.
Well, there was that animosity there.
Yeah.
It's different from going from like property disputes to just, I'm going to bomb you. That's crazy.
Yeah.
It's quite a,
It's pretty dramatic from, going from something sort of minor to doing something so extreme.
Backhouse claimed Colin had long harbored a grudge against him over the land, over the death of Digby, even over imagined slights. According to Backhouse, Colin had the motive, the temperament, and now perhaps the means.
The police weren't sure. I mean, there was no hard evidence linking Colin to the attack, and Graham Backhouse's narrative, while compelling, it wasn't airtight. The police agreed to set up protection for the family. Officers were stationed at Widden Hill Farm around the clock.
Yeah. Bomb goes off, you're going to take...
They're going to send people out to just keep an eye on, it's quite an extreme situation.
They'd be crazy not to. I mean, it's obvious signs that people are out to get him or trying to kill him. You're going to have to protect him. But that protection didn't last long. Just over a week later, Backhouse asked for it to be withdrawn. He told officers he wanted to return to quote-unquote normal life and suggested the attacker might strike again if the police weren't visibly present. Reluctantly, they agreed, but with one condition, that a panic button be installed at the farmhouse, directly linked to the police station.
Well, the village of Horton by this time was on edge, as you could expect. People whispered about the backhouses, about the bombing, about the feud. No one really knew what to believe, but everyone had the sense that something terrible had just begun and that more was going to be coming.
Well, yeah, I mean, a small village with just a couple hundred people in it, and you have a car bomb, that's
But you wouldn't
crazy.
think that it would stop there. You would kind of half expect that whoever's done this would just continue to intimidate and,
Well, yeah, but also people might think, oh, someone's going around just going to be blowing people up like a mad bomber.
Yeah.
Running around blowing people up. That's pretty scary.
Well, there's nothing at that point to say that, it's solely targeted. Anybody else could just be random attack and then someone else could be attacked,
Yeah. So, well, all that was going on. So crazy. People were scared. On April 30th, just 3 weeks after the bombing, something happened at Widden Hill Farm that would change the entire course of the investigation and turn suspicion in a shocking new direction.
It was just after dusk and officers arrived. They had no idea what they were about to walk into. Inside, they found a scene straight out of a horror film.
There was blood everywhere. In the hallway lay the body of Colin Video Taylor, the Backhouse's neighbor. He'd been shot twice in the chest at close range with a double-barreled shotgun.
Nearby in the lounge, Graham Backhouse was slumped on the floor. Blood was streaking from his face and chest. Deep gashes ran across his cheeks and torso. One of the first officers on scene later said Backhouse was curled up, sobbing, incoherent, shaken, and clearly in distress.
Well, I would hope, you shoot somebody by the looks of it, you'd be pretty upset. Like someone's come over and started something maybe, and then you've had to shoot him.
Yeah. I mean, who's to say that, we'll get through the story, but at first sort of glance of this story so far, Graham might not have been the one that shot him. He might have been visiting him, and then some intruders come along, and yeah.
Officers secured the scene and called for ambulances. Backhouse was taken to the hospital with serious lacerations. Colin was unfortunately already dead. The initial interpretation seemed pretty obvious. A violent confrontation inside the farmhouse. One man dead, another seriously wounded. I saw the picture of the gash.
Yeah.
That was brutal.
There's a big, big slice mark.
Yeah, it went from his ear to his chin, like down his jaw.
I mean, it's a bit like, is it the Joker with like half a Chelsea smile? I mean, Jesus.
So let's see what happened.
Well, in Colin's right hand, a Stanley utility knife. That detail struck officers immediately. It looked like a classic case of self-defense, a frenzied attack, a homeowner defending himself, and a fatal shooting. But as we'll see later, nothing about this case would stay simple for long.
Backhouse gave a statement from his hospital bed. According to him, Colin had arrived unexpectedly at the farmhouse that evening, claiming he'd come to repair some furniture, which that's what, he did some odd jobs and that.
But it sounds like he's trying to make out that they were actually like friends of some sort, doing the odd jobs for each other, when he's clearly already had told the police that he suspects he's the one that had done
there's
the car bombing.
There's supposed to be all this animosity and all this stuff. And
if I was the police, I would be like, hang on a minute. Why is he coming around to fix some of your furniture when you're accusing him of car bombing?
That just seems weird. When Backhouse told Colin there was no work that needed to be doing, Colin's tone shifted. Suddenly, he became angry, rambling, and paranoid. He accused Backhouse of having caused his son Digby's death.
Well, Backhouse said that Colin had begun ranting about God, about revenge, and then made a confession to him that he had been behind the entire campaign of threats, the anonymous letters, the sheep's head on the post, and even the bomb that nearly killed his wife, Margaret.
Well, there it is. It's all wrapped up.
Well, he should.
So it's pretty buttoned up right there.
Got Colin to write it in a.
But it's secondhand. It's a secondhand confession. So it's like, okay. So he confessed to all this. So then the police would be like, okay, we're going to go investigate. Go check his house and all that for bomb materials and all that. So I don't know. Then Backhouse claimed Colin pulled out the knife and lunged at him. Backhouse said he ran into the hall, grabbed his shotgun, and warned him to leave. When that didn't stop him, he fired twice. It was, in his words, kill or be killed.
The police obviously began to try to verify this. It was, after all, the second violent incident involving the Backhouse family in just 3 weeks. Was it the end of a targeted campaign or something else entirely?
In the early stages, police treated Backhouse as a victim. It fit the narrative. He'd been receiving threatening notes for weeks. There had been a car bomb planted under his car, and now the man he claimed was behind it all was dead. Case closed. See, just like I said, all buttoned up, like a little bow on it.
The cracks began to form, subtle at first, then unmistakable. It started with a knife. A constable at the scene, acting on instinct, had removed it from Colin's hand before the forensic team arrived. Now, that decision would later complicate the analysis of the scene, but it also raised questions. If the knife had really been used in an attack, why wasn't it found lying elsewhere? Why was Colin still clutching it?
I would say probably like they probably burst in.
Hmm.
And, when someone's got a weapon, you get away from them. Like if someone was firing a gun, you see it in police videos. The police kick the,
Yeah, they do. Kick the weapons away, don't they?
yeah. Possibly that could have just been like, he could still be alive and get up and
Hmm.
start swinging again.
Yeah.
And then there were the wounds on Backhouse. Deep lacerations across his face and chest, requiring dozens of stitches. But strangely, no defensive wounds on his hands. None of the injuries you'd expect from someone fending off slashing knife attack.
Hmm.
You hands up. You'd be like, stop, don't,
Yeah.
and try to protect yourself.
Yeah, they tend to find if you're defending yourself in a knife attack that, you'll have not just on your hands, you could have like knife marks on your arms where you're kind of just raising your arms up to kind of block every attack. But still, the police didn't jump to conclusions. They wanted to get everything right. While forensic work began at Widden Hill Farm, investigators looked into Colin's background. Was there any proof that he'd been behind the vendetta?
Well, the short answer, no. Nothing definitive. There were no fingerprints on the threatening letters. No witnesses have ever seen Colin near the Backhouse property at odd hours. The handwriting, crudely blocked, obviously disguised, couldn't be matched to anyone.
In the weeks following the shooting, police kept digging. They returned to the car bombing, the event that had kicked all of this off. Bomb disposal experts had confirmed the device was homemade. It was packed with 4,500 lead pellets and gunpowder extracted from shotgun shells. Simple, but lethal.
That would be like an estimate. I would be the poor technician that has to count out how many pellets, everywhere.
Yeah, I
Around-
wouldn't
probably-
fancy it. I mean, they couldn't be quite small and fiddly as well.
Yeah, they're probably just like a good estimate.
Yeah.
For
Or maybe
4 to
they
5
just weighed them and just kind of...
Yeah, like 4,000 to 5,000. Be like,
Yeah.
that's probably right around what would fit in here, that type of
Yeah.
thing. But one odd detail stuck out. The bomb had been placed so precisely beneath the driver's seat that it could only have been installed by someone with access to the car. That meant the suspect either had to have known the Backhouses very well or had been inside the garage unnoticed.
Yeah, because the car was being kept in the garage, wasn't it? Well, this is what happens. Being with
Gotcha.
an American, sometimes being a Brit, I copy his words. But anyway,
Like
Gary.
tomato.
So yeah, so obviously, like I was saying, like the car was actually in the garage, and it exploded inside there, didn't it? So, what about motive though? Backhouse had claimed that the attack was intended for him, not Margaret. But if that was true, why was the bomb in the car that she was driving that day? Why had he offered her the vehicle at all?
Yeah, if Margaret was the target, then
You'd put it in her car, wouldn't you?
put it in her car. But if you're trying to get
Yeah.
Graham, he put it in his.
Hmm.
And he's like, hey, babe, take
Well,
my
if
car.
there was
Take
an
my
issue
car
with her
today.
car, it's like, well, you'll have to take my car. I mean, it's kind of like a normal thing to do. I think a lot of couples would just be like,
Well, police also discovered that just before the bombing, Graham Backhouse had doubled Margaret's life insurance policy, raising it from about 50,000 to 100,000. The detail didn't sit well with the police, especially with investigators already growing suspicious of the convenient timing of everything.
yeah, I mean, with the increase in the life insurance, I mean, he was in debt for up to £70,000, possibly more. It makes sense that he's increasing that in order to maybe cover all his debts. We shall see what happens next.
That does seem pretty suspicious. Probably very suspicious.
Highly
If
suspicious.
I
I
was the
mean,
police, I'd be like, yeah, okay, all right, I'm going to look
it
into
would
you
be
more
a
now.
very, very weird coincidence. But anyway, by now, the villagers in Horton were deeply unnerved. First a bomb, now a shooting. Neighbours said that they'd never imagined such violence on their doorstep. Most people knew both families, and while there had been many whispers about tension between Graham and Colin, few believed it could have escalated into a murder.
Well, then came a break. A document examiner named Mike Hull was going over the "You Next" letter, the one found with the severed sheep's head. Hall spotted something subtle. The impression of a doodle faintly visible on the paper, almost invisible to the naked eye.
When police searched the farmhouse again, they found a notebook in one of Graham's drawers. This doodle matched perfectly. It was for the same shape, same positioning, a casual scribble made right before someone had tore the page out to write a death threat. That was the first hard forensic link tying the threats back to Backhouse.
Ooh, them little scribbles you do when you're waiting on the phone.
Mm-hmm.
You're just scribbling on the paper, waiting for whoever you're
Yeah, and
supposed to talk
obviously
to.
the imprint go through to, sometimes can go through to another couple of pages, depending on how hard you're pressing. But
It didn't stop there. A single fiber was recovered from one of the threatening letters. Forensic analysis showed it matched one of Graham's sweaters, an almost invisible thread, but it suggested the notes had been written not just in his home, but while he was wearing that garment.
the narrative was starting to wobble. Police still didn't have proof that Backhouse had faked the attack on himself, but their confidence in his story was slipping. Quietly, they reclassified the investigation. What began as a home invasion and possible vendetta was now being looked at on something potentially more complex.
Still, no charges were filed. Not yet. Backhouse returned home from the hospital after several weeks and was seen occasionally in the village. He told people he was just glad the nightmare was over, but inside the police headquarters, the case was far from closed.
Well, the villagers, they'd gone from gossiping about a bizarre feud to whispering about something darker. Some began to say that Graham Backhouse had always been theatrical, that he'd enjoyed playing the victim. Others insisted that Colin had been an odd man, prone to brooding.
Well, that's village life. Everybody knows everybody. Small town, that type of thing.
I lived in a village, yeah. There's a lot of gossip in a village. Everybody does know everybody. That's very, very true.
Yeah, well, it was a village divided at this point, and the press had caught on. Reporters descended on Horton, dubbing it the Village of Fear. The story had everything: rural isolation, gruesome threats, explosions, a dead man with a knife in his hand, and at the center of it all, Graham Backhouse, a man who now seemed to be hiding more than he let on.
But yet, despite the growing suspicion, there was still no hard proof that he'd lied. Just loose threads, until forensic science steps in and begins to tighten the net.
So, here we are, months into the investigation, and everything is starting to shift. Graham Backhouse was no longer just the victim of a terrifying vendetta. Behind the scenes, police were beginning to question everything: the threats, the bombing, even the bloodshed at Widden Hill Farm.
By mid-1984, detectives had quietly flipped the narrative. They were no longer trying to find out who attacked Graham Backhouse. They were trying to prove that he had orchestrated everything himself. The vendetta, the letters, the sheep's head, the bombing, and even the shooting.
Well, that meant building a case based on forensics, psychology, and timelines. It wasn't going to be easy. This wasn't a whodunit in the traditional sense. It was a did he fake it story, and the answer would rely heavily on science.
And that's where Professor David Gee came in, a forensic pathologist called in to analyse the physical evidence from the scene of the shooting. Looking at the blood spatter patterns in the hallway at Widden Hill Farm, what he found completely upended the idea of a struggle.
For one thing, there was very little blood near where Graham claimed the attack began. If he'd been slashed repeatedly by someone wielding a knife, there would have been blood spray, defensive wounds, or at least a trail showing a chaotic fight, but there wasn't. Yeah, so if you're moving and jostling, there's going to be, blood's going to spill out everywhere.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've seen, they do that in crime shows. You see all, they do base it on a lot of, realistic things. So you would expect to see blood splattered everywhere.
Yeah, we've all seen Dexter.
Yeah, that's a good show. Loved it. Or even more telling, the blood from Backhouse's wounds were mostly found in the lounge after the shooting. That suggested he had inflicted the wounds on himself after firing the gun, and not before. I remember he had no injuries, to his hands and arms. Nothing to suggest a desperate struggle with a knife-wielding man.
Well, that's just more suspicions go moving up and up and up. So then there was the knife itself,
Yeah.
the one allegedly used by Colin to attack him. It was still not in Colin's hand when police arrived, which sounds suspicious itself. Guy had pointed out that in almost all real knife attacks, the weapon ends up dropped, flung, or knocked aside, not neatly held by the dead man.
Well, Guy testified that it was highly improbable that Colin had held onto the knife after being shot twice at close range with the 12-bore shotgun. His conclusion, the knife had been placed in the man's hand after death.
Yeah, I would be like, yep, because if he falls down, if he gets blasted with a shotgun,
Well, your
and
reflex on it,
you
your
just-
reflex is just gonna,
you're going to fall back and your hands are going to go out and you're just going to drop whatever's in your hands probably. So, yeah.
more than likely. And I mean, the guy's forensic expert. He's going to have seen so many like, scenes of this sort that will have a lot of consistencies to prove that what he's saying is this is what had happened. He wouldn't have the knife right by him in this position. So
Then came the forensic evidence from the car bombing. Backhouse claimed that the attack was meant for him, but the facts painted a different picture. He was the one who offered Margaret his car that day. He was the one who had increased the life insurance policy on her just days before the explosion.
And then there's more. The gunpowder used in the car bomb had been traced back to the shotgun cartridges found on the farm, matching the very gun that Backhouse had kept at his home. It was all circumstantial, yes, but it kept stacking up.
The tipping point in all this was the letters. A forensic document analyst, Mike Hall, showed the court how the threats had almost certainly been written by Graham Backhouse himself. The faint doodle imprint on the letter, it matched a notepad in Backhouse's drawer. Even the type of paper matched his home stationery.
I remember the single fibre from one letter. It matched a sweater off Backhouse's. Statistically, the chances of coming from someone else's identical garment was almost zero. The implication was clear. He had written those threats and staged the entire campaign to appear like a man under siege.
Well, that was the final straw for the police. They were like, we've got him. So Graham Backhouse was arrested and formally charged in the summer of 1984, not only with the murder of Colin, but with the attempted murder of his wife, Margaret.
Well, when his trial began in early 1985, Bristol Crown Court, it became one of the most sensational cases of its time. The prosecution painted a chilling picture. A man so consumed by debt and desperation that he'd rather kill his wife than face financial ruin, and who then murdered his neighbour to cover up the first crime.
Well, someone who's so desperate and they're just being like, I can't get out of this. I see no way out, and then he's talking about affairs and all this stuff. So maybe he's not so happy in his marriage anyways. So he's like, well, I can bump her off.
With the pressure of being in so much debt, obviously, anybody being in such debt would be trying to look for solutions. I mean, obviously, normal people would go to the resort of killing for life insurance.
Yeah. I mean, I think most normal people would be like, we have to sell. Just sell up, pay the debts off and move on. But no.
It seems like he took the dark path.
Yeah. Well, the defense, of course, told a different story. They stuck to the original narrative that Colin had been unwell, grieving, and violent, that the vendetta had been real, that Graham had simply acted in self-defense, and that any inconsistencies of his account were due to the trauma and confusion.
Doesn't sound like the defense had a lot of evidence to back up their narrative. But the jury wasn't convinced. The physical evidence was too strong. The bomb, the blood patterns, the planted knife, the fake threats, all of it pointed to the same conclusion, that Graham had staged it all.
And then on May 3rd, 1985, Graham Backhouse was found guilty on both counts, murder and attempted murder. He was sentenced to life in prison. Yeah.
Wow.
Well and truly buttoned up now. It's just a cruel plan.
It was remarkable that Margaret Backhouse had survived both the bombing and the revelation that her husband had likely tried to kill her. She stood by him in the early days, even after the shooting. But after the evidence came out in court, she reportedly cut off all contact.
Backhouse served over a decade in prison before he was moved to HMP Leyhill, an open-air prison in Gloucestershire. And in 1994, 10 years after the bombing, he died there of a heart attack at the age of 54. I do believe that, if I remember correctly, he was playing cricket.
What, when he died?
Yeah.
Oh.
Too much exertion. His ticker went out.
At 54 years old. Jeez.
Yeah. Not good. All that stress.
It's very young to have a...
Well, there were rumors.
Mm.
There were rumors that he got stabbed in prison.
Oh, really?
But that nothing was ever substantiated or anything like that. And the official prison record, they said, no, heart attack. There was no stabbing. So
Interesting.
it might have been just like a rumor.
I mean, I wouldn't have thought murderers would be in open prisons, though. I mean, obviously, this was the early 80s, or mid 80s.
Well,
obviously different back then, but I would have thought that serious crimes like that, they would be in more secure, not open prison. But he never admitted his guilt, not once. So right to the end, he insisted he was innocent, the victim of a setup, a misinterpretation, a twisted series of coincidences. But the evidence obviously told a different story.
Well, what's so chilling about the Backhouse case is how calculated it was. He didn't just try to get away with murder. He designed an entire world of misdirection around himself. The fake threats, the staged enemy, even the sheep's head. It was all there. Just theater, dark, elaborate theater.
Definitely, by, all accounts with the evidence that there was, that it's just diabolical that someone could go to them sorts of lengths. But perhaps most disturbing of all, it very nearly worked. Had Margaret had died that morning in the bombing, the police might have believed the vendetta was real. If the forensic team hadn't questioned the blood patterns, the shooting might have looked just like justified self-defense.
Yeah. And it was the kind of case that changed how British investigators looked at so-called victims. Sometimes the person screaming the loudest about being targeted is the one doing the targeting.
Yeah. Well, that's the story of Graham Backhouse, the man who turned Widden Hill Farm into a stage for a cold-blooded performance.
That was crazy. But I feel bad for Maggie. She was just a nice lady, a farmer's wife, taking care of the kids, and was just with a guy that would do something like that to her. That's just awful.
Well, this was such an interesting case, full of twists and turns.
We would love to hear what you think about it. Follow us on our socials, Instagram, TikTok at Murder Most British, and X at Murder Most Brit.
Follow and comment and give us a rating. It helps us so much. And thank you to everyone who already has.
Yes, it has been very, very nice already just from the first episode. Obviously at this point, it's family and friends and whatnot.
Onwards and upwards, though, I think.
It's just so nice to hear good feedback and all that. Until next time, stay safe and stay curious.